Professor Dr. Mario Staller doesn't do things by halves. He's got 2 PhDs. He's got 2 Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu World Championships, I believe. He's an expert in 2 martial arts, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Krav Maga. And I think he's kind of had 2 overlapping careers, possibly more. He's a professor in a university in Germany. He's also an accomplished police officer and trainer of police officers in different aspects of conflict performance. Mario, how are you doing?
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Paul. Really nice right now. But one thing I'd like to add in the beginning is like it hasn't been Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu I'm world champion at. It's like a Jiu-Jitsu fighting, so it's a kind of different system. So
Okay.
Don't give me credit for that one.
Okay. In my head, everything it's just a mush of everything becomes Brazilian, I suppose. But so I mean. You have really high ranking in Krav Maga as well, right?
Yeah. Later on, basically, I did a lot of martial arts, like all of us, I think, in the talks here. I started with Judo, Jiu-Jitsu, and later on, I turned to Krav Maga. And then let's say, made a career in there. I combined it a little bit with a police use of force training I had, and from there on I went into the research stuff, and so basically it's like you said, it all came together at some point.
Yeah, let me share this screen. So you have there's a few different websites with your bio on it. This one it's from the Tactical Decision Making Research Group, and it talks about you're Professor of Psychology, the University of Applied Sciences for Public Management, North Rhine-Westphalia, and the Institute for Professional Conflict Management, police officer, training of police forces. But then your academic history, it's an unusual trajectory. So MSc in Critical and Major Incident Psychology in Liverpool in the UK, MSc in Sports Psychology in Berlin, an MA in Sports and Exercise Science in Berlin, an MSc in Sport Coaching in Leeds, and then a PhD in Pedagogy and the Structure of Jiu-Jitsu Fights and its relevance for elite athletes and coaches. And then another PhD in psychology on influential factors in tactical decision-making of police officers. That's unusual.
A little. The third PhD I handed in 2 weeks ago.
All right, okay. So you won 3 PhDs.
But then it's enough. It really is a quite unusual, let's say, career pathway.
Yeah.
It all boils down to basically martial arts, or let's say conflict management at some point. Because I really started as an athlete, like in martial arts and combat sports, really just for the fun of fighting in there. And from there, I went to the police, and of course, since I had all this background in there, they said, "Hey, you want to join us at the instructional department and become a police use of force trainer?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." So I could combine it a little bit, and basically at that point, I think I was, let's say, 21 years old. I competed later on at the World Championships, but at this point I was in the German national squad, and I had a lot of questions in my head about how to become better, how to basically optimize your training at some point. And that's why nobody could get any answers at that point. So that's why I started studying besides my regular job as police officer. So I started with a sports psychology degree, and I was like, yeah, this really gives me an edge. But then I came up with some more questions about exercise science, and I said, okay, let's study this one. So it all was like, okay, how can I optimize my training at some point? And the MSCs then turned into, okay, you want to go for a PhD? And I said, yeah, of course, in that area. So that's why they come together. It wasn't that I was looking for a degree or said, I want to do this. It was like I wanted to get the knowledge. I was just curious how to optimize, let's say the learning environments in there. And at some point, then I had to make the transition from the police force to the university because I was too deep into the academic pathway.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I've seen a few of your presentations, and your research is incredibly interesting. It's always pragmatically focused. Like there has to be a pragmatic outcome. Like how can we optimize? How can we improve? What's the best way to teach? What's the best way to learn? What's the best way to implement, and so on? And some of your talks are so interesting that I've even sat through them in German, and I don't speak German, and and I was still enthralled by a talk that you gave that seemed to, I was going to ask you about this because I never got a chance to ask you afterwards what it was actually about. It seemed to be about the use of computer games in training. What was the argument of that one?
And the argument of that one was basically, I compared how video game designers design the games for learning. Like, when we imagine, let's say 30 years ago, when you bought a video game, at some point you had to check how the controllers work and all this. Maybe you read a handbook of the game or something like that. But now, if you turn on the game, you're immediately into the game, and it immediately starts. But it builds the complexity along the game. So in the first 2 seconds of the game, you grab your gun and then you can aim a little bit, but it's always embedded into the narrative already. So you're playing the game. And that was my argument in there, that at some point we have to play the game, meaning we have to fight even at the beginning. Yeah. In a maybe less complex kind of way, but we have to fight if we want to get better at fighting.
Right. And that was there was a similar I guess your research builds and builds and you pursue different dimensions of it. But the last talk that I saw you give and heard you give, and it was in English, fortunately, and you looked at the different ways in which you'd filmed training sessions of police officers, and you'd looked at the time spent doing stuff, the time spent listening, the time spent with instructors just demonstrating stuff. And you came up with some really interesting conclusions. And one of them seemed to be that if someone is in a situation and you say, do A, B, and C, and you teach them to do that, then in 6 months' time or a year's time, they will have forgotten all of that and they'll just be a mess. But if you say someone's going to point a gun at you, someone's going to pull a knife on you, or someone's going to grab you, and you just say, solve the problem, just solve it, then that person will always know how to do that. They'll always go, here's the problem, I need to solve it. Is that fair enough? So that's like starting a computer game. You're in a computer game, what's going on? Solve it. Is it like that?
A little bit like that. That's basically the first talk you just mentioned when we started this kind of research, and now we're even further down the line. But basically it boils a little bit down to that, like different instructional approaches. And if we're looking at, let's say, efficiency in police use of force training, how they train combat or hand-to-hand combat use of force, it has been, for long periods of time, like an instructor told how the technique works, basically how he or she perceives the technique works for the personal body, but it didn't work for, let's say, other individuals. And what we found out basically in Germany was that when they came back after a half a year of being on the streets, they come back and they basically forgot a lot of what they have been taught. And that's why we thought, okay, maybe we have to check how we deliver stuff. If we do it basically, let's say, if we can optimize it at some point, because of course there is no right or wrong. It's always a very messy thing if you coach or if you conduct training. And what we did with the let's say observational study was we really sat down with 4 researchers. And we analyzed 5 weeks of training for the recruits, with basically every second what they did in there. and how much the instructor were talking, how much the recruits were practicing, if they were practicing more problem solving, or if they just reproduced the techniques the instructors showed. And we looked at this from the shooting perspective, from the hand-to-hand combat perspective, and from the technical perspective as well. And it came down to the point that there has been a lot of talking from the instructors to the recruits, and they actually spent pretty low amount of time practicing for themselves. So it was like, if you around 6%, like that. They problem solving. They practiced, of course, a little bit more, but 6% of all from the whole training time, they engaged basically in some kind of problem solving exercises. We have to. And then, because on the streets, in the field, they said, I wasn't able to solve the problem like we did in training, because maybe they don't train on it.
Yeah.
No.
So you carry out that research, and then you present it back to the police body and go, look, this training is inefficient because there's too much instructors chatting and going, you could twist it like this or you could twist it like that, but you need to spend more time exploring, playing, solving problems. And was that the kind of thing that you went back to them with?
Yeah, basically we did the research together with police use of force instructors, and they were really open-minded. But they haven't had any feedback so far how they basically deliver the training. So that's why it's really important that you come back with some, let's say, objective data where they can see, oh, I didn't know that I was talking that much. So they can reflect on it and basically, adapt. Of course, at some point, some things you have to talk them through, and you have to, of course, show some techniques, but it's like, it has to be in balance at some point.
Yeah. And so you're working on trying to find the kind of ideal balance and kind of perfect the ways of delivering this training within a limited period of time.
Yeah, the last study we did, I think I talked in Trier about it as well. We had the preliminary results. It was like we had these two kind of classes, police recruits, and one of them we taught knife defense techniques, but in a very, let's say, traditional kind of way. We showed the technique and said, okay, these are the checkpoints, please work on that. And in the other group, we approached them with a more kind of principle-based approach, like, okay, just make sure that you don't get hit by the knife, and just block the knife how you like, how you manage it to do, and be sure that at some point you engage in some kind of counterattack or whatever. So it was more principle based. And the results, we were just in the middle of analyzing it. They're really interesting because in the beginning, the, let's say, kind of traditional group, they really performed better in the test, because we tested them pre, post, and we did a retention test later on. And we tested them on the techniques they were taught, and we tested them on surprise attacks and let's say transfer tasks. We attacked them with kind of knife attack they didn't encounter before, basically.
Yeah.
And we looked how they performed, videographed it and all the stuff. So the traditional group, they were better in the beginning. And the non-linear group, they later on, they performed as well. They even retained the tech, they could solve the problem a little bit better in the end, and they were more creative with the kind of problem solving. But interestingly, the linear group, they also solved the problem in the end, but they had a little bit more the feeling that they were capable of solving the problem in the beginning, because they had some kind of strict guidelines.
Okay, so so you think there's got to be a mix of the two, like you have to just drill them, this is how you do it right, or this is a good way of doing it, but then also understand that you also need to teach people to be creative and be spontaneous.
That's the thing. It's like, it's not a either or. It's like, it's a kind of balance, and you have to really figure out who needs what at what point in training. Because if somebody hasn't had the self-esteem to I'm not sure if I can do this. Of course, some kind of guidance is really good, but what we saw is in the kind of creativity, there were a lot of different solutions to the same problem, which basically worked, and this was really interesting.
And I guess, I mean, I don't know what the kind of diverse makeup of the German police force is like, but I'm guessing that, like most European countries, Germany wants to have an ethnically diverse and gender diverse like police force. So are there different, have you noticed different requirements? Are you able to cater for different learning needs of different types of police recruit, or is it that you're training people who have been selected from the police force to be like in the riot squad or something like that? Is that,
let's say, this is the kind of problem where what police use of force coaches, police use of force instructors face. They have to individualize basically, because if they get a bunch of recruits, you have all in there, from one with fighting experience and the statue, and little boys and girls which basically haven't had a fight before, and they all should be at some point capable to solve conflict. And that's the point where you have to think about other solutions than fighting as well. So where you have to, or maybe there is the problem of restricting the solutions of conflict management to just the physical part, because the people, the recruits, the young recruits, they should also learn to solve the conflict with their individual capacity. Like if I have 50 kilos and there's a 100 kilo mixed martial arts fighter trying to beat me, maybe there's a different kind of solution than starting to punch and fight with him. But if you're 100 kilo by yourself and the attacker is 80 kilos and you have been, let's say, 3 years in the ring so far, you have other options available.
Yeah. And so I guess there are the questions as well. There are time-honored questions about the effectiveness of martial arts that you are in quite a good position to comment upon. I mean, I'm not expecting you to resolve these issues for all time, but in your experience, are certain types of martial arts more easily employable in strategic or tactical situations? So, for instance, like there are certain stereotypes about martial arts, right? Like if you go to some kind of like traditional karate, you might walk up and down in lines punching and saying kiai. But if you go to a Krav Maga class, they'll teach you about exits and entry points and space and strategic weapons. So is it the case that the person who spent 10 years walking up and down in lines doing this is not in as good a position as someone who has spent 5 years in Krav Maga learning about situational awareness? Or is that a massive simplification?
Maybe a little bit. It more boils down to the let's say the kind of how you've been trained in the system. But that's a question: what constitutes a system? Is karate training the karate training you just talked about, where you walk down the line? But of course, you can do Krav Maga as well, like that. There's a lot of Krav Maga videos online where they're just doing what an instructor said they should do. So basically, it's the kind of same thing. It's like the kata, and they are let's say karate performers who engage in a lot of problem-solving activities like kumite fighting and all this stuff, and they spend really low amounts of time and just drilling some basic techniques. So it more comes down to the how of training. So what's your kind of pedagogical approach to training than the content itself? Of course, if you're talking about conflict management, at some point you have to talk about, okay, what's in there? If you don't talk about situational awareness, and if you don't train on it, of course, how should you be situational aware of anything? If your regular training, if in your regular training you encounter a lot of different problems and you always have to be on the lookout for potential attackers, of course you're in a better position to be situational aware of a second attacker. Because this was basically a kind of experience I had in my personal martial arts history. I was trained like a professional competitor. I always had one opponent, and then I made some experience with an older instructor, and he basically threw another attacker at me at some point, and I was really confused because hey, I was fighting this guy. Why is another one coming from the side? And saying like, yeah, that's in real life. And like, yeah, maybe you're right, of course. So that's at some point you get this kind of tunnel vision if you're just practicing one approach. So the basic argument would be, relating to your question, it's not about the system itself, it's about the how you're teaching it.
Okay, so you encountered a different approach when you were a competitor, and it was about one-on-one. There's one opponent, where in this environment, as opposed to as soon as it becomes a police kind of like a police officer walking into a domestic situation or a pub or something like this, that you need to have a completely different mindset. Not zooming in on your attacker, on your opponent, but like what is going on around here.
Yeah, when I remember the talk at our first conference, I think it was 2015, I think, in Cardiff.
Yep.
Martin Meyer, he held a talk there about the doorman.
Yeah.
About their approach to conflict management. And there you see basically that each occupation, like police force, emergency services, doorman, has a different kind of context. And if they're working long enough in there, and they reflect on the experience they have, and they mix it up with a little bit of martial arts, they know what they have to focus upon and what works and what doesn't. And the thing we are doing is, okay, let's figure out for which context, what are the main ingredients you have to have.
Yeah, I always thought Martin's paper it made me laugh because so he's a karateka and he gets a job as a bouncer. And his instant reaction in any conflict situation is to kick. But as he said, there's too many tables and chairs and people around. So he had to like go back to his training and go, well, I can kick, but like in this environment, it's a really bad idea for me to try and kick. It really made me laugh.
Yeah, and that's basically the simplified approach to training. You have to figure out what is the context you have to be able to perform. In the end, what's your criterion environment? If there are a lot of tables around and you can't kick, and you have to kind of sample this information to your training setting and to train on it, that you get the same feedback or similar feedback from things you're doing in there, and then you can build it in there.
So do you? I mean, I don't know about your current training and your current, say, martial arts teaching, but do you teach people competitive stuff like me, or do you, or are you focused now on the tactical and environmental as well as the physical? I guess I don't know.
They're basically two hearts in my body, and they still are. So at some point, I had this kind of professional career in combat sports, and of course, I became a coach in there as well. So I train a lot of guys from the national sport of Germany here as well, jiu-jitsu fighting, and so this is the kind of competitive combat sports thing. And on the other hand, I have this kind of approach to conflict management where we're looking how to optimize, and we of course train civilians, professionals, police forces, special forces, and all this.
Yeah. So how much training would a regular police officer in Germany get? I mean, how often do they? Because there must be so many different scenarios. Like you're on your own, you're with a partner, or it's a large situation. I mean, how much time do officers get to train? Not people on a special squad, but a police officer. How often do they refresh their training?
Not very much. Let's say a few times a year, if at all.
Yeah.
So it could be. It depends. In Germany, we have 16 federal states, and each federal state has kind of different approach to training. But in some states, it's like a few hours per year, maybe 1 hour in 6 months. Others have 1 day per year, around that. But it's not, I would argue, not more than 10 hours.
Yeah. But I guess that's largely this situation rather than this is how you put someone in an arm lock. I mean,
It depends. We observed a lot of different kind of trainings. Like now from our academic perspective, we're looking in different states how they conduct the training in there, and it basically differs. There are approaches where they throw the police officers in a lot of situations, like they do scenario trainings. But of course, there are also approaches where they do a lot of technical drilling, and there are no kind of measurements of how efficient the training is in there. So of course, we have to at some point evaluate it.
What would you like? What would be your ideal? What would you recommend? I mean, just how does it? A bit guess based on your research and on a feeling, like on your just sense of what you think would be the ideal for someone who was going to be working in dangerous situations. What would be your ideal?
You have to contextualize the training, I would argue. So it doesn't matter how much training you have. A significant amount of time you should be practicing representatively designed training tasks. Let's mean if you just have one day, please spend a lot of time in doing scenarios and all the stuff. But then again, it's like, I'm saying let's do scenario. But if you're doing a scenario and the scenario is just 5 minutes and you're waiting 3 hours for the next run to when your turn is next, then of course it's a problem. It's like where we now see this thing, we have to practice with partners, and our partners, we call them simulators, they have to really do a good simulation with you, and a lot of repetitive practice, but with a lot of kind of different simulations, because otherwise it isn't handleable.
Okay, and I'm glad you said simulation, because I was thinking about asking that. I mean, to what extent can virtual reality or augmented reality be used in like real, like training for real possibilities? Because I guess the psychology of it and the emotions of it can be transferable. So you could be in a simulated environment and still be dealing with like the adrenaline and the stress and the desire to succeed. How much use do you make of the virtual?
It's like now in the Corona phase, let's say, it's kind of a similar approach we have, because right now we're really doing online training and really doing conflict management training online. So maybe I can attack you sitting here from the screen and you can react to it. So you can react to the cues I'm giving, but at some point, of course, you don't have the feedback. Okay, have I been hit? Did he get me? How does it feel? But at least you can react at some point. And that's the same problem we have in virtual reality at the moment. I'm not sure where we're at in 20 years. But of course, the feedback you get when you're performing a kind of technique, it's kind of limited right at the point right now. But it'll depend on the technical capabilities of the system.
Yeah. And how are you managing to train much at the moment, or is it solo training, or are you allowed to interact with people? Or
we do a lot of Zoom training right now. So we are really interacting with all the group, and we have the instructor, and he tells the students what to do. And we really also try to engage in some kind of fighting. So like if I'm punching here, you go to the side, and it's really fun. But of course, I think it's the best we can do at the moment. But of course, it's not like the real thing. But at least you have this kind of social community you have. You can train with your peers, and that's kind of, I think, important thing right now.
okay, so you've just finished your merely your third PhD. I mean, you've just finished that. What's next? Have you got any more research projects lined up after your? What is your third PhD on, actually? What was the topic?
The subject is basically sports coaching, and it's about optimizing learning environments for police training. So it's basically all about the studies I talked about.
Mm-hmm.
But
What's next?
What's next? Really good point. Of course, it will be something related to conflict management,
Yeah.
but I think right now it's like a little bit more focusing on how can we educate the coaches, the trainers, that they know what's important. We have to a little bit focus more about, let's say, coach development in
Mhm.
police force, because this is of course, since already the kind of training is a really neglected area. Coach development is an even more neglected area at the moment.
Okay. And are you still really active with the DVS, the German? It's kind of German. What's the translation? The exact translation? It's like the German Martial Arts Studies like Institute, the association. What does DVS stand for?
DVS is basically the German Society of Sports Science, and we are representing the Committee of Kampfkunst and Kampfsport, Martial Arts and Combat Sports. So it's a commission or committee of martial arts and combat sports of the German Society of Sports
Yeah.
Science.
And so, are you still involved in that?
Yeah, I'm currently the speaker last year and this year, and yeah, it's really has been an awesome journey for, let's say, like 9 years now.
Yeah.
I came to table 2 years later than everybody else. So Sixth, Martin, Peter Kuhn, they were already in there, and I joined, I think, in 2013,
Mm-hmm.
and then 2000 you started your kind of network, and then it was just the right time to get involved in martial arts research.
Yeah, and so you're still actively involved in the committee and in presenting at, because you have annual conferences, don't you? There's a conference every year in Germany.
It is right now. It's like it should take place, but we have to see how the situation evolves right now.
Yes, it is. It's a difficult time, and so you have published in English and in German. I mean, is your main publication now to be in English, or do you just do 50-50, or just publish whichever way seems relevant to the journal or the book?
Yeah, that's the problem when you start writing everything down. For who you're writing it down, it's like, would you have an impact for the German police force? There you definitely have to write it in German.
Yeah.
If you want to have an academic impact, of course, at some point it's good to write in English. So it's like it's more like where to focus upon right now. But in Germany, it's like next year we're planning a kind of handbook for police training, where we basically put everything in we know at this point in time, and this would be a really good resource, I think, because there's really not that much available academically focusing on training in German.
Okay. So most,
but there's the kind of language barrier you always have when you're talking about this thing. It's easier if you're living in the UK or.
well, yeah, I guess so. I mean, do you when you write for the police, what kind of mode of address do you use? I mean, do you write in a very scholarly way, or do you write in a different style for the police? I mean, who are the readers of it? Are they like senior people, or are you writing for people on the ground, on the front lines, or?
That's basically the next problem, how to the art of writing in there, because I think a lot of things we wrote so far, it was too scholarly regarding the language we use, because even if we, let's say, the last 5 to 6 years, there have been more and more papers out there in German, but the impact wasn't like we expected it to be. So that's the next thing we have to look. Okay, why is the knowledge out there, but it isn't been used? So and what can we do to enhance this kind of usage of the knowledge? Basically.
Yeah, that's always the problem. That is this universal problem. It's like people go, oh, I think I'll write about martial arts, and they don't even look to see what anyone else has ever written about. It's like, I reckon, blah blah blah, and it's like Sixth always says, like, what? why don't people just read what's out there? And they just don't. Even academics don't do it. Even academics don't do a basic literature review. They don't like. Well, what else is Krav Maga and police training? You know, they'll just make it up themselves.
Yeah, that's why in the last year these kind of hubs, the martial arts research network, the German committee, that's these hubs, they are really important to get everybody together. Because I remember my first experience in Cardiff, my first experience in Erlangen 2030. It was like I was entering then and I was like, wow, all these people, they did a really good job in getting everything together. And I thought I knew everything, but now I'm seeing that I don't know anything. And you get all these different kind of perspectives. In the beginning, you said I was always focused on the efficiency of training. I was like, really, yeah, you do something and you have to have an effect. And then I came to Cardiff and I was like, okay, you can talk about martial arts in a completely different kind of perspective, like globalization, all stuff. I haven't thought of it in the beginning. I was like, just my little worldview. And then you really get to know a lot of people, and yeah, there's a lot to read,
No, I know, but I really like the chance to. People ask me like, what is martial arts studies? And for me, it's like it's that's the second question. The first question is, can we get everyone together and have a conversation? Like, so you have like real pragmatic people like yourself with philosophers, psychologists, and sociologists, and but not like a fight, but like people can come together, and people who've looked at film and people who've looked at mediums. And it's just because we're all really interested in whatever we think of as martial arts or combat sports. And it's almost like a guaranteed happy conversation because we love it anyway. Even if one person cares about the history of something that comes from China and other people are just concerned about how efficient it is, you're gonna have a stimulating conversation. So yeah, no, it's great. And next year we're going to share a conference, aren't we? We're going to have the English language martial arts studies conference in Switzerland with the German the Kampfkunst and what is it? What's Kampfkunst?
Kampfsport.
It's basically the same, but I still get it wrong. Yeah, so we'll all meet again, hopefully, like next summer, hopefully.
Yeah, this will be awesome, this conference. I'm really looking forward.
Yeah, that will be great. That will be great. Okay, Mario, it's been an absolute pleasure, as always, talking to you. I hope to see you again in the real world sometime soon. But thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much, Paul.